What's going on, folks? Welcome back to DLife HD. This is Victor, and after a long time of waiting, and after many hours of playing, I am finally ready to review Monster Hunter Rise for the Nintendo Switch. So without any further delay, let's jump right into it.
I was a worker, had to upgrade to a boss. Used to live in the hood, but had to upgrade to a loft.
First up, let's discuss the game modes. Monster Hunter is pretty straightforward when it comes to its game modes. It mainly consists of offline playing and online playing. There is a very heavy multiplayer focus in every single Monster Hunter game, and so you have the option to either tough it up and go and do all the quests by yourself, or join up with friends online and play them together. The way that this is mainly separated is through village quests and hub quests. Village quests are solely for one person. There's no way to do them multiplayer, and it is mainly a solo experience and more story focused in that regard. A lot of times the quests are scaled to be a lot more easy because they know only one person will be facing them. Second, you have the hub quests. The hub quests are centered around multiplayer mainly, though you can face them in a solo player mode. One feature that's unique to Monster Hunter Rise is that the quests in the hub will actually scale to each individual player. So if you're playing with 2 people versus 3 people versus 4 people, it's all going to be a different difficulty level, and it even works for playing solo. I will admit I have done plenty of multiplayer in this game, but the majority of the time I have actually just been doing these hub quests by myself. Monster Hunter is a big multiplayer game, that's one big focus of it. Getting together with your friends, portably or online, to play these games is a heavily featured aspect of the game, but I will admit I mainly like to play the game solo. It's just something that I've experienced with every single Monster Hunter game. I did most of the previous game in the series World by myself, and that's just what I like above all. The majority of the quests that you'll take on in the hub and village are just regular hunting quests, where you have a big target to go off and kill. That's your objective, and that's all. That's the majority of the quests. But one thing that's unique to Rise is a new type of quest called Rampage quests. Rampage quests are actually really interesting and something that we've never seen at all before in a Monster Hunter game, and they're more like a tower defense section of the game. You can set up different utilities and weaponry in order to defend off from these waves of oncoming monsters. And it's really interesting. You are able to defend a giant wall. You don't want the creatures to come and attack that wall, or else they'll break through and get to the village, which is what you're trying to do. It ties in with the story of the game, and overall it is very hectic, especially in single player, which, like I said, is the majority of what I've done. But overall, I think it's a welcome addition, and it does a lot to spice up the gameplay in between your normal hunts. Next up is the UI and graphics. Monster Hunter Rise is a showcase for Capcom's RE engine, which up until Ghosts and Goblins, a new version of that older game on the Nintendo Switch, we had not seen on the console. It's for higher end games, and so the Nintendo Switch would have trouble running games that use the RE engine. But Capcom built Monster Hunter Rise from the ground up using the engine for the Nintendo Switch rather than porting another one of their games like Monster Hunter World or a Resident Evil game to the Nintendo Switch directly. And so they optimized the RE engine to work really well with the Switch, kind of downscaling it, but still pushing and using a lot of power that the Nintendo Switch does offer in order to display really, really amazing graphics. It's kind of insane what Capcom was able to pull off with this game. It is 30 frames per second, but but the graphics just work super well. It's sort of a mid-tier between the older Monster Hunter games like GU that we saw HDified on the Nintendo Switch, and Monster Hunter World, which is this glorious masterpiece of graphics and very heavily cluttered, real feeling maps. But I think I really like Monster Hunter Rise's style because I like those older games. I like having open space in order to fight these monsters, and that's sort of what the game leans into. It's very realistic in its graphical style, and there's a lot of heavy emphasis on the monster designs themselves rather than the environments. You can see the individual hairs of a monster, the different blight effects that they use, like fire and poison, are very distinct in their style in this game, and I think it really, really shows through using the RE engine built up from the ground for the Nintendo Switch. The UI itself is a very cluttered mess. Like any Monster Hunter game, a new fan coming into the game is going to struggle to understand where they're supposed to go to change certain settings. You're constantly getting pop-up tutorial menus even when you're 30-40 hours into the game, because they're constantly, as you're playing and progressing, introducing new things. That's just typical of RPGs of this nature. But overall, I think if you're used to Monster Hunter games, you're not going to struggle with the UI at all. But if you are not, you might want to look up a few tutorials where you might want to change some settings. Next up is the controls and gameplay. Oh boy, the controls are as cluttered as ever. In addition to having the very messy controls that Monster Hunter has carried from the beginning, it also introduces the wire bug, which is the ability to essentially grapple hook using a very tiny bug that has very strong silk. It's kind of an oddball idea, but it actually adds a lot to the gameplay. So pairing the wire bug with the already clunky controls makes this game very, very confusing, even for me, who has been playing Monster Hunter for a long time. I find myself getting into the rhythm of just sort of zipping through the air with the wire bug, and then accidentally pulling out my weapon and falling all the way to the ground and hitting it very, very hard. It's interesting, and I'm honestly, even as many hours as I've played the game, which is around 50 in order to basically do all the content there, I'm still getting used to the way the wire bug feels. Now, as far as the controls go for the older games, a lot of the quality of life features that the previous Monster Hunter game World introduced are present here. You have things like, rather than holding down L and just having to scroll all the way through your item menu to find the item you want, there's sort of a spin dial wheel that you can easily access items and see them all laid out at once. Things like that just really bring this game to the next era, and I think are more welcoming for newcomers. It's interesting that I say that the controls are still complex, but I would say this is probably the most easy Monster Hunter game to understand, mainly because of how fast it is. One thing about the controls in the older games is your characters were just so heavy. And while I actually really like the heavy feature of the older games, it turned off a lot of older fans because not only did they struggle to get used to the controls, but they were constantly getting knocked around by the monsters because they didn't know what they were doing. It just made for a very difficult learning curve, and I think that this is mainly taken away with Rise because of how fast it is. And that's mainly because of the wire bug, which is huge in the gameplay. It's not only just zipping around when you're not around the monster, but it's actually implemented into how you play. Like, if you get hit and you have a wire bug in your menu, you can just easily do a wire bug evade and get away and drink a potion. Whereas in the older games, if you get hit, you roll over and you have the potential to be stunned and get hit again. I think that makes it a lot more user-friendly and welcoming to new players. The gameplay itself is basically, aside from the rampage hunts, just like a classic Monster Hunter game. Of course, there are features that are implemented to make it feel newer and, I guess, welcoming to new people, but overall, the DNA of Monster Hunter is present, and that's what I'm mainly here for. I want it to feel like a Monster Hunter game rather than just a generic hack and slash game where I'm going out and killing things that I don't care about. The gameplay is very focused on learning the creatures that you're going off to hunt, because every single monster is unique in its style. You're going off with a specific target to hunt a specific monster, and as you play and progress, it's not just the progression of seeing your equipment get better, but you also learn as a hunter to get better. The muscle memory is there. You learn the moves of your opponent, and that learning curve is fully present here, and that's what I love most about Monster Hunter, is that the creatures feel living, the environments feel alive, and learning how the creatures operate and where they go on the map depending on their style. Like a more water-focused creature, when they're almost about to die and damage, they're going to go to a more secluded water area, as opposed to maybe a wyvern or a dragon. When they are close to death, they're going to go somewhere very high up, like a nest. Learning how these monsters operate is fully present here, and above all is present in the gameplay. Alright, now let's talk about the music and sound.
I really don't see how anyone could have noticed us.
It was a perfect display of stealth.
That's why we expect great things of you. You're always razor sharp.
Excellent! That's my ace!
Monster Hunter games have fantastic soundtracks. It's sort of what makes or breaks the game sometime to me. I liked World's soundtrack quite a bit. There were a lot of really good tracks. I liked the main theme, but there was a lot of duds, I feel, especially like the village theme and others of that nature. Monster Hunter Rise, though, really soars, no pun intended, above all when it comes to its soundtrack. Because the whole atmosphere of the game is very inspired by older Japanese architecture and that sort of thing, the soundtrack really leans into that as well. Having traditional Japanese scales and also using choirs. Monster Hunter actually uses its own language called Wyverian, and when you start the game you can choose whether you want to play the game in English, Japanese, or Monster Hunter language. And the music fully features this language in choir form, even when you first boot up the game and see it on the home menu. The music is such a rush in this game. You have the homely feel of the village that just welcomes you as you come back from your hunts, and then you have just these intense, complex pieces of art that are out when you're out in the field. It's just fantastic, and every single unique zone in the game has a different song, so it's not like it's just the same fight song played over and over again. When you're in the desert, it has a more inspired desert feel to the music. When you're in the forest, it has more of a tropical inspired fight song, and I think that that's just fantastic. And overall, I'm really happy with the music. They actually put out a small EP version of the soundtrack on Spotify under their Capcom Sound Team artist label, but I am super excited for them to drop the entire soundtrack, because on Spotify, that's sort of where I go to listen to my Monster Hunter soundtracks, and they have all of them on there, and I have lots of playlists, and so I'm really excited for Rise to drop on Spotify, so I can just continually relive these awesome moments where the music is tied to the hunt and the spectacle is present. Alright, now let's discuss the story. Monster Hunter Rise does not lean very heavily into the story. I think Monster Hunter World, outside of the game that was a spin-off Monster Hunter Stories, was really the first game to even try to incorporate a story really in depth. There was a really good story in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, but it was never really the main focus of the game. So, in these games, I mean, it's sort of hard to make story beats, because a lot of what you're doing is repetitive. You know, this quest comes in, go kill this monster, you go kill it, you make its armor, and then another quest comes in, and you go kill that monster. You know, it's sort of hard to make a story in between that, but it at least tries. The story is actually centered around the new Rampage mechanic that I discussed earlier. There is a monster called Magnamalo, who is the flagship of the game, and I must say is a fantastic hunt. Really amazing. But aside from that, Magnamalo has this new blight, and it's stirring up all these monsters to go in a frenzied rage to attack the village that you're trying to protect. And so the Rampage is sort of that in-between spot between the wild and the village. You know, you have this giant stronghold set up to defend the village from all these monsters coming in a frenzied rage to attack the village. And I will say, there's a little bit more to the story as you get further along. I don't want to spoil it for you, so go ahead and play that for yourself. But that's sort of the setup. That Magnamalo is this crazy, ferocious creature that is stirring up all these monsters and causing them to go to the wrong environments and causing them to rampage and attack the village, and also causing certain monsters to go into an apex state. It's actually pretty similar to the 4 Ultimate story, which was about a virus that was infecting the monsters. Like I said, a lot of the stories kind of feel the same in these games. That's not really the focus of it. It's mainly focused on the gameplay, and that's okay. That's really why I come to it. But I will say that the characters in the game, while the story is not super in-depth, are very engaging and welcoming. I really like all of them. The elder of the village, Fugen, is awesome. I like Hojo, who is the guild master in the hub. Everybody in this game is very friendly and welcoming, and it's really cool to see them in this new graphical style, and I love all the characters that this game offers. Alright, now let's get into the final rating. One thing that's interesting about Monster Hunter is it's sort of a progression of a game. You get the base game, and then you get lots of updates that basically double the content. It's kind of insane. Usually 1 year after a Monster Hunter game comes out, they release a giant either update or they fully re-release the game, and it just doubles the content. Usually this is referred to as the Ultimate version. So if you've played Monster Hunter Generations to Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, you'll see that leap in content. So Rise is really just a base game. So there really isn't as much content as there will be down the line. So it's kind of hard to give a critical review of the actual content that's offered in the game, because I know that the content will be doubled down the line. Although they are already releasing a content update which will come out at the end of April very soon, and I'll probably try to cover that and everything it adds. So that said, I'm really only going to be reviewing the base game and not really thinking about what's going to come later. And as far as the base game goes, there is a lot of content here, and that's what you want from a Monster Hunter game. You want endless hours of content, making sets in the end game, or just grinding out every single monster. It's just creating your own fun. And while there isn't as much content as there will be, I think that overall what is here is very structural for what is to come, and I think that that's amazing. And all the new monster designs work really well in this game, and overall I would give this game a high score. We don't really do scores here anymore, at least I don't, so I will say this is a must buy for the Nintendo Switch. Even if you haven't enjoyed a Monster Hunter game in the past, it's a little bit more welcoming, and it's beautiful, and the music is fantastic. I think it is a must buy, and I also think it is a top 5 Switch games for me. Of course, I don't think that that was bewildering to anybody. I love Monster Hunter, and so if you have not already, I would highly recommend you go out and buy Monster Hunter Rise. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments down below what you thought of this video. We love talking to you guys. Remember to like and subscribe for more videos like these. Lastly, check out our Twitter account for gameplay of the latest releases. But most importantly of all, remember to always stay 1-up.